that leadership is broken now.
Mm-hmm.
The stories of leadership we had for centuries about the great leader, the heroic leader. And yes, we still have some of those, and they deserve to be seen as heroic leaders. But a lot of the time, I think what's been wired into us is that if I get into a leadership position, I've got to almost like putting on a jacket, a superhero cape. And we're not sleeping well, or something your viewers may not know much about or haven't really considered is I have, again, the privilege of speaking to people who have put their lives on hold, Mike, to fight the big end of town. So corporate strategy, government policy isn't working the way it used to. So I get brought in at that end to get them to think about, to ask the questions about scratching beneath the surface. I trained some years ago under a gentleman named Johann Galtung, who he's just passed away at 93 years of age. I trained under him when he was about 86 years of age. He was seen as one of the founding fathers of conflict resolution.
Did you know there's a technology that's actually an app on your phone that uses sound waves to tell your brain what you want your brain to do? We had a young man that was on a guest on our podcast, the Mike Litton Experience, who had a traumatic brain injury. He was sleeping 3 hours a night. He's using NewCalm now and he's sleeping more. Go to newcalm.com, Mike15 promo code. Newcalm.com, promo code Mike15 for an extra 15% off. Go today.
Welcome to the Mike Litton Experience podcast. Everyone has a story, and our passion is to help them tell it. Mike is passionate about being a father, a teacher, a realtor, an investor, and a leader. And now, introducing the host of the Mike Litton Experience, Mike Litton.
David Ross, thank you so much for being our guest on the Mike Litton Experience. I'm super excited for our time together. And like we talked about before we hit record, everybody has a story, and our passion is to help them tell it. So with your permission, we're going to start with where you were born, go up to today. We want to talk about this amazing book that you wrote called Confronting the Storm. We also want to talk about what you're doing as a peacemaker, right, with corporate America, because you're coming in and you're helping upper echelon management actually talk with lower echelon, right, with the masses, right? And it's a big deal because there's a real, like we talked about before we hit record even, there's a real disconnect right now. And bringing them together is as much an art as it is a science, right?
Absolutely, Mike. There is so much to talk about. Look, Mike, firstly, hello to you, a warm hello.
Howdy.
I'd give you a big hug if I was there in person, and that might sound a bit weird to begin with, but I'm very grateful to be here, having watched many of your programs. Boy, you're kind of almost born to do this stuff, Mike. The focus you have on the person across the screen, and good morning, good afternoon, good evening to your viewers as well.
Thank you, buddy. I'm super excited to have you here. So where were you born?
So I was born and bred in Sydney. I'm going to try not to have a bit of a giggle because I was just thinking about this not too long ago, Mike, that my childhood, my teenage years was like something out of Stranger Things. Now, I'm going to try and remain professional, Mike, this early in our conversation. When I say it was like Stranger Things, I'm not for a suggestion saying that there was something happening with government or somebody over there in that weird building across the parkway. There was no evil lurking beneath our feet, but it was like a boy's own adventure. I was off with my friends, my mates, as we call them in Australia, off on our BMXs. I lived at the end of a cul-de-sac, a dead-end street, and beyond the street was a stream and a huge corridor of remnant woodland. So in Australia, everything is gum trees, these beautiful, huge gum trees, gorgeous things. And while it was a fairly narrow corridor, as a boy with my mates, it felt like we were hidden from the world. We could do anything.
Could have been in the Amazon, right?
Could have been in the Amazon. You're on your bikes and you're just riding around, you're seeing wildlife. It was just, And for it was very much a typical Gen X story where the parents didn't give a damn, didn't give a damn about where we were. You know, you
They knew you
imagine
were
I'm
safe, though. Yeah, I
yeah,
got you.
yeah.
Yeah.
Imagine I'm holding a big broadsheet newspaper. That's Dad. Dad in the morning. I get up. Dad's behind his big broadsheet newspaper,
Hmm.
having his breakfast. Turning. I don't know how people could turn the pages in those big sheets. And then I'd be straight out the door, and they'd see me about 8 o'clock in the evening, or
Hmm.
Mum would be screaming out to the world, to come in for dinner.
Right.
But I'd just be with my mates, and then I'd come back in, and I'd be muddied,
Hmm.
scratched across the face. They'd roll their eyes and just, get to the dinner table. So
Right.
it was a wonderful adventure, and I'm sure in so many ways that I probably haven't even reflected on yet. That's had a huge lasting impression on
Oh, yeah.
what's been a really lovely and special life.
Yeah, absolutely. So who was the most influential person to you growing up?
That's a great question, Mike, and I knew it was coming. Um, it's a really important question, and I'm doing my darndest not to give it a bad answer. But on the one hand, my dad was that, for anyone who's Gen X or older, you'll really appreciate, Dad was the silent, I was going to say domineering. He was dominant within the family, but he wasn't an aggressive or anything. He was a very quiet, reserved sort of gentleman. But we knew who the father figure was.
Hmm.
So he certainly had an influence on me. But my mum, I probably didn't realize it completely at the time. Um, imagine, yeah, imagine for anyone probably of that generation or younger for that matter,
Hmm.
the kind of relationship you have with your mum, what they've meant to you through the years.
Hmm.
Particularly when you've lost your mum, you realize how special they've been. And in my case, my mum lost her father when she was 14.
Oh my
She
gosh.
lost her mum when she was 17.
Oh my gosh.
So my mum was the youngest of two.
Hmm.
Imagine losing your whole world, the vast majority of your world. By the time you're 17, you're still probably an awkward teenager.
Hmm.
She's put in this situation where a crippled uncle comes to look after them. And I don't know if I should be saying looked after them. And that's no reflection on him, but physically he's in a difficult situation. And she's also got to cook and clean for her older brother and for him. So her childhood's taken away from her
Hmm.
at such a young age. She's forced to grow up.
Hmm.
And so, I can't imagine in that, with much regret, Mike, I've never fully realized, never had the chance to reflect with mum. She's left us 17 years ago from Alzheimer's, but I never really fully understood as a grown up, had to have that conversation with her about, mum, you set all your focus on us,
Hmm.
but you've had all that stuff happening in the background, like, how did you do it? So I've
Hmm.
sort of tried to live my life. I'm a good listener, probably not as good as you, Mike. You could represent the US in the listening Olympics, I suspect.
Thank
But
you.
I owe that to mum, and my curiosity, I suspect I owe to mum. And I think that's extraordinary on her part, that she could try and focus on the other rather than retreating within herself.
Yeah, I agree with you. I agree with you. In high school, did you have a favorite subject?
Um, there's another weird smile on my face at the moment. I went to a really good high school, but I didn't gel with the school.
Mm.
As I said, I was curious, but I had, forgive me for a second, I had a lot of teachers doing this. They had their back to us the entire time,
Mm-hmm.
writing on the board. They didn't once come in to share with us, whatever their subject was that they were passionate about. They didn't share that passion or wonder
Mm.
with us. They had their back to us the entire time. Write a full board's worth of content and then scrub it off and then write a full, and then the period would end.
Mm-hmm.
So I had a love for biology, and it comes from a love of life and a love of people. and a love of ancient history.
Mhm.
And that a lot of that, Mike, I think came down to I had two really good teachers in my life. One was the biology teacher.
Mhm.
One was the ancient history teacher. They showed a dignity, if you like, they treated us with dignity that we had as students, we had worth rather than just shut up and get to your desk and
Mhm.
right.
So less transactional, more inspirational.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. And so that's had a lasting impact on me. So my career started off in environmental management. So it was biology stuff, and I kind of fell into it. But I think a lot of it was because of I'd been inspired by the biology teacher. And later in life, um, I studied foresight, anticipating, not so much predicting the future,
Mhm.
and that might come up in our conversation later on. I'm not one of those people with a cool hat and the crystal ball, but I found that in later life with the work that I did and do still to this day,
Mhm.
I had to help leaders and organizations to be able to thrive in the world we live in.
Mhm.
They needed to be able to anticipate different options for the future, like almost dipping your toes into the different forms of the future
Mhm.
to get a sense of, well, what does that feel like? And interrogate that. What does that mean to me as an individual,
Mhm.
as a leader, as a dad, as a mum? And what does that mean for our organization? So, I'm going to ask you a question in a second, Mike, about that. But I find it fascinating that in life, you know, people who have such a huge influence on you, they probably
Mhm.
don't often realize that they've just tried to do their best and treat you as a human being, and they haven't realized the lasting ripples they've had in your life. And I was wondering, because you asked me such a great question, yeah, when you're at school, has that left ripples for you?
Oh, yeah. Yeah. So I farmed with my grandfather in Oklahoma for 9 years.
Wow.
And when I was 13 years old, my parents, halfway through the school year, came to us and said, "We're moving to California." And I said, "No, we're not. I, you know, I'll stay here. Be sure to write, right?" Um, and so we negotiated, and the agreement we came to was that I would come out to California with them. I was 13 at the time. I was way too big for my britches, right? I came out here, I would go to school out here, and then every day of summer I would spend in Oklahoma working on the farm.
Wow.
And I had a lot going on. I was in my fourth year of farming with my grandfather, and there was a lot happening. I was so busy I didn't know who I was during the summer. And so the day that school got out, the next day I was on a plane to Oklahoma. The day before school started, I was on a plane back to California. One of the things that happened was that following year after we moved, I was a freshman in high school. And my mother went to the high school and registered me for classes because you had to register 2 weeks before school started. And she called me and she said, I, I, you had an elective available and I picked an elective for you. And if you don't like the class, you can quit. I just want you to try it. And I said, "Great. What's the name of the class?" I mean, I'm sort of bracing myself, right? And she says, "Speech." And I said, "Mom, I don't have a lisp. My stutter's gone. I speak,
Oh,
most people say I'm pretty articulate, right?" And she
yes.
said, "No, not that kind of speech. Public speaking."
Wow.
Oh, no, 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 no. We're not doing that. I have no interest in that. In fact, I'd rather die than be on it. No, 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 no. I think you should at least try it. Just try it. And if you don't like it, you can drop it. I understand, but just at least try it. Okay. So I go the first day. And the teacher is Mr. Roach. He's a grumpy old guy, very no nonsense, no filter, and which is interesting for a speech teacher, right? And he he asked me to stay after the first class. And I thought, all I did was show up for class and now I'm in trouble. Great, right? This is going to be terrific. I'm dropping this thing so fast. It'd be like a hot potato, right? I stayed after, and he said, you know, I think you are incredibly talented.
Wow.
And I think you could be one of the best public speakers in the nation. I'd like you to do me a favor. I'd like, if you're interested, we're going to a speech tournament this Saturday at San Diego State. The bus leaves at 7 a.m. If you're here, we'd love to have you come with us just to check it out. Nothing else, just watch. When you come back, let me know what you think. If you don't like it, I won't ask you again. So I go out of curiosity more than anything else. And I went to every round, including the final rounds. And I thought, I can do so much better than these people. I'm not, I mean, right. So I came back and I said, I'm in, right. I wrote a speech. I won the next tournament.
Wow.
I started collecting trophies like there was no tomorrow, right? When I graduated after my fourth year, when I graduated from high school, I was in the top 0.5% nationwide of competitive public speakers. And it was an amazing experience. And it was something that changed everything in my life. It opened up so many different avenues and so many different different opportunities and that type of thing that it's hard for me to quantify. Like, part of the reason we're here right now is because of Mr. Roach, and because he saw something in me that I didn't see. And I learned a lot. And one of the things that I learned was, if I got up in front of a group of people, no matter who it was that was sitting in that group, like, I'll tell you this, a couple of months ago, I was a guest on a podcast, and the host of the podcast is a public speaking professor at Stanford University. And after we finished, he said, you know, we have our end of the semester dinner that we do at the end of every semester, and we'd love to have you come up and be our celebrity guest of honor. I'm like, well, let me go find you a celebrity, right? So he's like, you know, right. And so I go up and I get up there, and he goes, okay, you're going to give the toast. What? You have 2 minutes. You can't go over your time. It's a mortal sin here if you go over your time. So you can't go over your time. You have 2 minutes. I'm like, it takes me 30 minutes to introduce myself, Bruce. Right? I've been called loquacious before, right? So I get up and I tell him, look, everywhere I go, and I told him, I said, Bruce gave me 2 minutes. It takes me 30 minutes to introduce myself. So I'm going to I want to add value everywhere I go, or I try to add value everywhere I go. I'm going to give you 2 items of value to take with you tonight. Number one, if you ever have stage fright, just love the audience more than you love yourself. Stage fright will go away. Right? Pour into the audience, care more about what they get out of it than how you look doing it, and you're good. You won't have any stage fright. Secondly, I was suggested to them that what I suggested that my 2 kids do, who are now 25 and 26. I told them a couple of years ago, I said, you need to go get a word processor blank document. And at the top, write in the largest font you can, stay in curiosity. At the bottom, stay out of judgment. Print it up and put it up in front of where you work, so you look at it every day. Because we're not curious enough. We don't ask the people that we're talking to about them anymore. We don't ask the people that we work with about them anymore. We just don't do it. And the idea, the whole thing about leadership and the whole thing about how corporate America should be run, it's run by a bunch of people that are incredibly insecure, and all they want to do is shout orders and have everybody hop to and do what they want done and move on, and not have a say in it, not give them any feedback. They don't want feedback. They don't want to know what they think. That's the wrong way to do this, I think. And so I think our leadership in America and around the world is broken. I think it's broken. And so, and one of the things that one of our guests that's been on 3 times has shared with us, this Scott Mann, who I shared with you before we hit record, the average attention span in America is 8 seconds. So if you're getting up in front of a group of people to talk, you'd better start with a question. Because if you start with, I'm Mike Litton and here's my resume, you've lost them. You can't even get to the resume part.
Yeah.
Okay.
Well said.
He was standing off stage. Scott Mann was, he mentions this in his book. He was standing off stage. This big Fortune 500 company had hired him to come in and be their keynote speaker. CEO gets up and says, I'm going to introduce our speaker, Scott Mann, in a minute, but I have a slide deck here that'll catch you up to speed with how we're doing as a company. He goes right into the slide deck. Scott was watching the audience. Everybody in the audience that worked for him was on their phone. They weren't paying attention anymore. If he had stepped up there and said, I'm going to introduce Scott Mann in a second. Let me ask you a question. You're on the front lines. I have a slide deck here that tells us how we're doing as a company. How do you think we did this year? What do you think we did? What do you think those slides are going to say? There wouldn't have been anybody on their phone, David. They would have stopped and they would have been engaged and they would have been rubbernecking if somebody raised their hand and were actually talking to the CEO, right? They would have been rubbernecking to see if they knew who that was, and they'd have been jealous because they want one-on-one time with the CEO. You with me? They wouldn't have been on their phones. When you ask questions, you engage. When you talk you lose. You just absolutely lose. And so one of the things that I've learned doing this, and all the years I've been doing all the stuff I've been doing, is it's really about the power of questions. I was a debater. I was one of the best debaters in the nation. One of the things that I was really good at was cross-examination. I could bring people to their knees just by asking the right questions. You with me?
I am, Mike, but here's an important question to you now. When I was looking forward to having this conversation with you, perhaps I should have clarified, am I expected to be brought to my knees today and, we end this conversation with me weeping before you and your audience?
Not in any way, shape, or form. Not in any way, shape, or form. In fact, if we're successful, you'll be giggling the entire time. So yeah, I mean, this is literally about you. And one of the things that I do is I ask a lot because I want to know, right? And I want our listeners to have an opportunity to get to know you better and sort of get to know where you're from. It's kind of a chicken and the egg thing. And our listeners love these life stories. That's what they're sharing with us anyway, is that they love hearing where you came from and how you developed and all that kind of thing. So let me ask you this. After high school, where did you go?
Yeah, thank you, Mike. And I'm going to try and remember a lot of the things that you had just shared with me. And I'm very appreciative that you shared those things. Because I can really connect with what you've said about, for example, curiosity and leadership being broken. I'll try and bring those back into the conversation later on. So I fell into university and I fell into coming back to giggling, I fell into a degree because a mate of mine who was a year ahead of me at high school fell into a similar degree at a particular university here in Sydney. And I went, rubbing my head and, all right, I'll just follow, I'll go into that area of biology because my mate's over there. And probably unbeknownst to me was the influence that biology teacher that I talked about before had on my life. 1 year into the degree, the first year has been a struggle for me. My grades have been woeful. I've experienced my eldest brother is back in hospital with cancer. So here in Australia, where I mentioned the Olympics before, if there was an Olympics for skin cancer, Australia would win gold every time because so much of our population has this sort of skin in a country that should not have this colored skin. My brother's in hospital with cancer for a long time. We've already had the experience of him being a 50-50 as to whether he's going to pull through it. So we're scared again for him. My brother's 9 years older than me. I'm still a kid you know, I'm 19 and I'm struggling with what he's going through. And to make it more surreal, mum's in another hospital with her own forms of skin cancer. No one's at home. You know, when I get home from university, everyone's at the hospitals, going between hospitals. And I'm bored at university. Again, it's no reflection on the teachers. They're really well-meaning, the lecturers. But I'm wondering what I should be doing there. And then we had to, at the end of that year, determine our major. And I'm thinking about actively leaving that university and maybe doing physical therapy or something, because my whole family's been about service, public service. And maybe that's another channel for me to contribute, something that's really passionate to me as well. And suddenly, I don't know why at the last minute, I've decided I'll stay kind of in the degree I'm in and do environmental management, which, while in the US and Australia and Western world, environmental management had been a subject that had been, or a degree that had been taught for a while before then. It really was still a niche thing. But perhaps because of that Stranger Things life that I'd had as a teenager, etc., I fell in love with it. Getting out into parts of the world, into rivers, into forests, and you know, I wasn't in an office. Oh, I just loved not being in the office, and I was really shy at that time. You know, I felt I was being really brave when, if I was talking to somebody, I actually looked at their shoes rather than my own. I was that shy. So be able to get off into forest with my friends for days and weeks at a time was brilliant. And I know you were talking before about life story, and what was pivotal for me, Mike, was that I was spending a lot of time in rivers, in waders, rubber waders up to there. If you can imagine when you've been washing things and you've had a rubber glove on, taken that glove off, and you've got to wash your hand with soap quite a bit to get the smell of the glove off you. In an Australian summer where it's up to 40 degrees Celsius, which is about 100 degrees Fahrenheit, you're in a pair of waders in a river downstream of a dam. So imagine if you've ever been to a dam and you've seen the flow, you know, the velocity of the flow. Back in the 1990s, I'm standing in a river just below where the water's being released. So for safety professionals out there, what I've just said would horrify you, because we had no ropes or anything like that.
No safety harness, nothing like that.
No harness whatsoever. And the reason I'm in the river is that, imagine probably for a lot of communities across the US and across, I know you've got lots of fans in places like Belgium, across Europe, Mike, as well.
Belgium's like number 3 or number 4.
Yeah, I think that's just brilliant, and I think it's not surprising too, in terms of it's a reflection on your curiosity too, and the stories that you're bringing to your listeners, your viewers. But in each community across many communities across the world, I should say, your water utilities, as they're bringing water to you, they've got to make sure that water is safe to drink. And so I was working for a water utility, and we were doing what's called biological monitoring. So we're in the river assessing the health of the fish communities throughout different reaches of the river, and also lots of other bugs and things that are in your rivers. So we'd sample those, analyze them, and be able to tell the water company, yeah, the water's still safe to drink. The pivotal thing for me was that time and time again, as a shy, you know, I was probably by that stage, early 20s, still shy. But I'm there with my managers, and from time to time, people from communities, or government or whatever would be come by, and they'd see these weird people in these, godforsaken temperatures out in these stinking waders, and people would be asking us, "What are you doing?"
Mm-hmm.
And I'd leave it for my managers. You can go and answer these questions, particularly if they're angry people we're dealing with. And these really well-meaning people that I was working with struggled, coming back to what you were saying about public speaking, they struggled to be able to communicate to people what we were doing and importantly, why we were doing it.
Mm-hmm.
So imagine sometimes we'd be talking to farmers. And I went to an agricultural high school too, Mike. So, raised cattle myself. And these wonderful, well-meaning scientists that I was working with would say to farmers, "Oh, look, we're testing the water quality here to determine the impact of your farming on the rivers." And I was just sort of, inside, I was just starting to cringe, thinking, what the, I won't say, but you know what? And
Yeah.
that left a lasting impression on me.
Mm-hmm.
I've always, there's kind of this holy grail for me to always continue to be a better communicator.
Mm-hmm.
But I realized then that, that thing about people ask you about when you were a kid, what did you want to be when you grew up?
Mm-hmm.
When I grew up, I never thought to myself that I wanted to be involved in assisting leaders and organizations with their most complex and most polarizing of issues.
Mm.
As somebody who was shy, I wanted to avoid conflict.
Mm-hmm.
But that pivotal moment led me to realize that with the complex stuff that I continue to work in, complex environmental, complex social, complex and economic issues through time, that we had always struggled to deal with those because of, and forgive me, Mike, and to your viewers for trying to get a bit too deep here, but we'd struggled because of structures in society. We'd struggled because of hierarchy.
Mm-hmm.
We'd struggled with being able to connect with people, that to deal with our most complex problems, it's all about, for me, it's about relations and it's about dignity.
Mm-hmm.
And I learned that in those pivotal moments in my stinky waders, that I don't have a sorry, I'm just trying to get the right wording here. I don't have a monopoly. I don't have a monopoly on truth.
Mm-hmm.
That what I have are my own beliefs and perspectives. And if we're going to get somewhere on our most complex of issues,
Mm-hmm.
people like those farmers that we used to talk to, they have an extraordinary input. There's extraordinary value to be gained in involving them. So I forgive me, Mike, if I've suddenly taken this conversation a bit too far beyond what you asked me. But
No, you're fine. This is intriguing to me. I think this is incredibly fascinating. And the thing is, you're right. There's the structure, and the structure that needs to be sort of torn apart and put back together, to be honest with you, is people don't communicate. People don't connect. People don't relate to each other. They sort of go, they're sort of like ships passing in the night, right? And when they have any sort of interaction with each other, it's the higher ups ordering the people that work for them where to go, what to do, right? There's no curiosity. There's no asking of questions. There's no, like when you're talking with a farmer and you're trying to explain to the farmer that you're testing the water, you're testing the river to see what sort of effect their farm is having on the river, you sort of have to do it in a delicate way. And one of the most delicate ways you can do it is to ask them. So let me ask you a question. You know that this river feeds the water supply to the city, correct? Supplies your water supply, correct? Yeah. Well, would you, as a consumer of water, want that water to be drinkable? Would you want that water to be quality? Well, that's what we're doing here. We're literally making sure that your drinking water is something you should be drinking. And we're making sure that if there are any impurities, that we remove those impurities before they arrive to you. And the only way we can do that is to test. Does that make sense? And all of a sudden they're like, oh yeah, that makes perfect sense. As opposed to, I'm testing the water to find out how much damage your farm's done to it. That's not necessarily going to go, kind of like a lead balloon, right? But it's one of those things where if you communicate in a way where you stay in curiosity, and you, like I tell people all the time, I'm the king of the stupid question. Why? Because I don't judge it first. Like I just ask, right? And some of my guests go, right? But it's always a question that's penetrating, and it's always one where I'm trying to get to whatever it is that I'm looking for, to find out what's going on behind the scenes. You with me? And what is it that
Absolutely, Mike.
motivates them? What is it that they're passionate about? What makes them get up in the morning? You know, that kind of thing. And so I feel like what you're touching on is incredibly important. And it's important for people to hear that there needs to be a better way, right? There needs to be, and there is a better way, but we need to basically implement that better way so that we're connecting with each other and relating with each other in a way that's dignified. That's my
Yeah.
feeling about
Mike, is it possible for, rather than having an hour-long conversation, could we go for sort of 6 to 10 hours, please,
it.
today? Because
We could
I,
be
I,
here a while. We could be here a while.
I so strongly connect with what you've been saying. I go with the mindset that generally people are well-meaning
They are.
and really caring about um, others, about their farmlands, rivers, the economies. They're not just, when they stop and take a deep breath and get asked the right questions. When they don't leap to anger and judgment, as you
Mhm.
said. We come to a realization that we're all just trying our best to contribute and live great lives, and help out those that we care about, or we haven't realized yet that we care about. But it comes back to, for me, I completely agree with you that it comes back to, um, um, firstly, trying to listen and listen deeply. And I'll very quickly say to you that, and I think, I know that you're going to really get this, that why I've got a bizarre career in some ways, that I've made my own. I can't say that I'm an accountant or a lawyer or some label, simple label like that.
Mm-hmm.
But what's been really fortunate about my bizarre career is the number of times that I've had the humbling of experiences where I've gone into a situation in an organization where they're dealing with their most complex issues, or I'm dealing with an organization's staff, or those who are affected externally by an organization's operations. And imagine people are turning up with, metaphorically, their pitchforks and their flaming torches,
Mm-hmm.
and they're ready to, storm your organization's barricades. They're ready, they're ready. They're really ready to just leap at you. They're ready to judge you, and everything that comes out of your mouth is about to, whether they realize it or not, confirm some sort of bias in their mind that you're an idiot or you're uncaring or something like that.
Mm-hmm.
And the number of times, Mike, where I've had the experience where I've listened to people and listened and listened and act like a sponge, being able to, as you do so well, take away their unease. And then I've got to a point where I've asked those people, either in public about something about, what's this situation mean to their life, or privately, I've asked them about what has this issue meant for their mental health.
Mm-hmm.
And then people proceed to then tell me, I can't anticipate what they're about to tell me, but they've told me the most personal of things that they've never shared with anyone about, saying, their spouse, they're fearful that their spouse is going to take their life, or some dear friend has taken their life, and that's just been eating away at them forever. Those sorts of stories I'm sure you'd appreciate, because you're so curious, those sorts of stories never leave me, and they have informed me through my career and through my
Well,
life.
I think the genius in who you are and how you approach this is you look at it in terms of the depth and the breadth of that person and where those emotions are coming from, right? And you care enough, like we talk about this all the time on the podcast. You have to care enough to ask, right? And you're caring enough to ask, hey, what's going on? How's your mental health? How has this affected you? Right? And what happens is, so we believe here that people are really motivated to share their story with you. They're really motivated to share with you what's going on with them because they are their favorite subject. All you have to do is care enough to ask enough to where you open up the floodgates. And you know this. Once you open up the floodgates, then you can just sit back and take notes and listen and, right? You ask questions from time to time, once in a while, right, about what they said. And you're there because what's happening is they're just basically they've spent all this time with all this in here and it's just festering. And if you ask enough, if you care enough to ask and you ask enough and you ask it effectively enough, you get them to open up and they open. And what happens is all this hurt that's been sitting in there, that's been festering, it feels like it's this big. Okay. But once they get it out, they'll look at you, and it's happened to me dozens of times where somebody looks at me and they sort of take a deep breath and they go, you know what? That doesn't seem as big now that I got it out, got off my chest, right? Now that I said it, it doesn't feel so big.
Yes.
You got to get it out. You got to, and oftentimes you and me have to be that outlet. We have to be that opportunity for them to share what's going on and how they're hurting and how they can get past it, right? Because as much as people love to talk about, I go to a therapist and I get fixed, right? Really, when you go to a therapist, you're talking to a mirror.
Yeah.
People don't realize this, but a therapist doesn't fix anything. Okay. They will prescribe you a drug, right? But they don't fix anything. All they do is ask you enough questions to allow you to fix yourself.
Well
See, we
said, Mike.
have the cure. It's here. We just need somebody to be the tool to help pull it out. That's my belief, right? And I believe you believe the same thing based on what you're doing, based on what you have done and sort of come into in terms of what you do professionally. And I think it's brilliant because what you found is something that needs to get fixed. And it's not getting fixed. Like they're not fixing it on their own. And so you're coming in and going, hey, let me be the catalyst, right? Let me be the bridge over your troubled water, so to speak, right? That was corny. But you know what I'm saying, right? Let me help you get to where you need to be, right? And let me connect you people, right? Because there's a real disconnect going on out there. So we're going to take a break. And when we come back, we're going to talk about your book, Confronting the Storm. We're also going to talk about what you're doing in terms of helping these companies to reconnect and get past and get this conflict resolution thing taken care of. We'll be right back. Did you know there's an app that has no side effects that allows you to use sound waves to tell your brain what you want it to do? It's called newcalm.com. And it's amazing. It literally uses sound waves. If you want to tell your brain to go to sleep, if you want to tell your brain to recover, if you want to tell your brain to put you in peak physical state, if you want to tell your brain to focus, if you want to tell your brain to take a power nap, you can do all of these things and more with newcalm.com. Go to newcalm.com today, promo code Mike15. Newcalm.com, promo code Mike15 for an extra 15% off. Go there today. And we're back with David Ross. Before the break, we were talking about what you're doing to help companies sort of bridge the gap, sort of bring people together. oftentimes it sounds like you're being brought in when there's a real disconnect and there's almost a battle going on between the factions in the company. And it sounds like what you're doing is coming in and saying, okay, break it down for me, leadership, break it down for me, labor, right? Let's figure out how we work together in this thing and how we can actually communicate. Can you talk a little bit about confronting the storm?
Yeah, sure. Thank you, Mike. Probably what I've only implied to this point is that I have the real privilege. That's probably the best way of putting it. I have the privilege of listening and listening deeply. Imagine a spectrum before us. I get to speak to managers, leaders, CEOs, talk about the situation they face. And like I was kind of following on from what I was describing before, it comes to a point where vulnerability comes into the conversation, and the CEO or the manager talks about, I feel really lonely in my role. Or, you know what? I'm passionate about the work that I do, but I don't feel like I'm really cracked up for it. Or alternatively, things are just so much harder than they used to be. And I just don't feel like if it comes to a conversation about what does success look like, I don't feel like I'm really a success anymore. But understandably, it's human nature that I don't feel confident with sharing that with anyone else. And David, thank you that, I'm sharing this with you. So thank you. That's one end of the spectrum. The other end of the spectrum is either talking with staff, it's talking with farmers, it's talking with Indigenous communities, it's talking with anyone else who is affected by an organization, and often people who don't get a chance to have their voice listened to. And I hope I'm not going to confuse things when I say this. So those conversations are taking place when we're often talking about government policy and or corporate strategy, and how that is being delivered in a highly complex, a highly uncertain world full of conflict. So while you've got the CEOs are saying that they're lonely, their staff are saying, "Oh, I'm really unhappy here," or since the pandemic, something's changed inside me. I'm not as loyal as I used to be. I want something with more, I want greater meaning out of my life, out of my career. And I want maybe more flexibility in how I contribute to an organization. I've got the people on the land, people like your family saying things like, we're losing a sense of home. What we loved about home, whether it be a rural environment, has now been affected by the operations of an organization. We feel like that's been imposed upon us. And we're not sleeping well, or something your viewers may not know much about or haven't really considered is I have, again, the privilege of speaking to people who have put their lives on hold, Mike, to fight the big end of town. So corporate strategy, government policy isn't working the way it used to. So I get brought in at that end to get them to think about, to ask the questions about scratching beneath the surface, which is something that probably you and I have been implying today, scratching beneath the surface and thinking about, for example, how the weight of history has impacted upon that organization and how that influences strategy or policy. How the deeper stories within organizations and societies are now in a really, a world that's highly interconnected, thanks to the internet and many other things that are going on in society, how that's making things more difficult. So strategies aren't working the way they used to. Styles of leadership. Sorry, I just paused there for a second because you talked about that before, that leadership is broken now. The stories of leadership we had for centuries about the great leader, the heroic leader. And yes, we still have some of those, and they deserve to be seen as heroic leaders. But a lot of the time, I think what's been wired into us is that if I get into a leadership position, I've got to almost like putting on a jacket, a superhero cape. I've got to be the one with all the answers. I will have the vision, and all you people behind me, my followers, you will follow me, and unquestionably so. And in the world that we live in nowadays, and I hope this is making sense, your staff, your stakeholders are no longer as unquestioning as they were, because in an interconnected, networked world, they're more coordinated, the more educated, the more sophisticated, and more demanding than they've ever been before. And so that makes for I hope I'm gonna start coming back to answering your question now, Mike, but that's probably a big context that, and you talked about the book too. From my research and my work experience, and from listening to people day in, day out, I've come to the belief that while we talk about the exponential advancement in technology, Ray Kurzweil, the futurist, talks about how in the 21st century, in terms of technology, we'll have 20,000 years worth of progress rather than 100 years, 20,000 years. We talk about technology, but the storm that I refer to in confronting the storm is that we've got this storm of interconnected technological, environmental, social, economic, and political challenges, the likes of which, some of which we've seen before, but what compounds the problem is the interconnectivity. You can't just latch onto one thing and go, I'll solve that, thinking the world's going to be better for you or your organization's going to be fine. We need to think of systems rather than silos. And like I said, I work with really well-meaning leaders whose stories always stay with me. But again, thinking about what you've been saying, reflecting on what you've been saying about the power of stories, a reminder to your listeners, your viewers, that I think that our old stories that create meaning for us and organize us into action are now failing us. So I was compelled to write a book about this at the start of the pandemic. And because so many people around the world were in lockdowns, I was really fortunate enough to talk to a former Norwegian Prime Minister, a former Sierra Leonean Foreign Minister, one of America's, from Fortune magazine's 50 Greatest Leaders, and talk to them about, these were people who were thriving rather than just, struggling to survive in this complex, uncertain world full of conflict. And Mike, what fascinated me, and forgive me for I'm being so repetitive, but you talked about curiosity before, and what was fascinating for me was that in so many of these conversations, for all of these leaders, I can see that my internet connection's unstable, so I hope you can still hear me okay.
Okay.
Good. Each of them, independent of one another, was talking about, for them, curiosity, humility, and vulnerability were critical to them. So humble enough to realize that as a leader, they don't have all the answers. They don't have a monopoly over truth, as I talked about before, over knowledge. In that sort of environment, being vulnerable enough to say to your staff, to say to your stakeholders, okay, this might be scary for me to say, but yeah, those problems you're dealing with, I don't have the answers to them, but being vulnerable enough to say, well, maybe we should, I'd love to hear your answers on those. I need to be curious enough to appreciate that rather than me having the answer, if I work with you and listen to you, and as you said before, Mike, get into the skill of knowing the right questions to ask at the right time, rather than just having, rather than having a piece of paper with just generic questions on it, knowing the right questions to ask somebody to get the most out of them, to learn that, to hear that from these amazing leaders was fascinating. So within the book, I talk within Confronting the Storm, as I said before, I argue that leadership is crumbling based on our stories that we've lived towards for centuries are no longer appropriate. We need to almost create new stories of leadership. A more feminine style, maybe that's not the right way of putting it, but it's a more collaborative, co-creative style of leadership, because by involving those who are interested in whatever you're dealing with, what your strategy is working towards, or your policy, by working with those with different perspectives, different experiences, that sort of collision, if you like, of different perspectives, I firmly believe, and what I see is that then results in, if we listen properly, that results in innovative solutions to our biggest challenges. And you're bringing along those who are affected by your operations. And can I make it very clear to your audience? I know I've been talking for a long time now, but if you've never anticipated stakeholder conflict or outrage, and if you think that your organization's never going to experience that, well, you're in peril, because it's going to come your way sometime.
Guaranteed.
Unless you treat, you can't keep everyone happy, but I think we're in a world now where, rather than just focusing on your shareholder, you've also got to actively consider your stakeholders. And if you do so, you're not going to have the people with the pitchforks and the flaming torches at your door. And for your organization, rather than those costly delays, it will instead shift to giving you a competitive advantage the rest of the industry doesn't have, and the creation of more innovative solutions and products and services.
Totally agree. I totally agree with that. And, I think the most masculine thing you can do as a man is be curious and care enough to ask.
Yeah.
Really. Because, we have this idea of what a masculine man is, right? We have an idea of what this masculine leader is and all this kind of stuff. And they have a furrowed brow and they walk with purpose and they're grumpy and all this, right? That's really not the way leadership is effective leadership is today. Effective leadership is I don't know if you've ever, do you know who Chris Voss is?
Yes. Yep.
So one of my favorite books in the world is Never Split the Difference. And one of the things that he does in that book is he talks about the history of the FBI, and specifically the hostage negotiation team, right? He was the head negotiator for the FBI for a number of years. And one of the things that he talks about in his book is, in the history of the FBI, when they had a hostage situation in the 60s and 70s, would roll in, they would start shooting things up, they'd shoot out the engine of the plane that was hijacked or whatever, and they would intimidate, they would talk at and order the perpetrator, and they would intimidate the perpetrator into giving themselves up. Until in the early 70s, it ended up in a massacre on a tarmac. And all of a sudden, Congress got involved and said, no, you need to figure this out. You know what's interesting is they started asking questions. They started talking to the perpetrator, and they started asking them, why are you doing this? What are you looking to accomplish? How can we help? Okay? These are some of the toughest people on the planet, David. And they are literally sitting and asking questions. And they're respectful, and they're emotional, and they're vulnerable, and they're authentic, right? Chris likes to say that they're somewhat authoritarian, but they're really not. They're humbling themselves before this perpetrator and getting this perpetrator to share with them what's really going on. And they're able to talk them out of things. You mentioned Indigenous people. He negotiated a hostage rescue or a hostage situation in the Philippines with the most notorious warlord in the Philippines at the time, is now dead. But he got, the one thing that he got was they had people listening to everything that he said. So whenever the negotiation was taking place, they were asking questions. The negotiator was, and they were listening to what the warlord was saying. And they pieced together what his longstanding hundreds of years complaint was. They went back to him and said, "We believe this is what you're saying." And he said, "That's right." That's the most powerful thing you can get as a leader from somebody that you're working with, is to get to a place to where you have so much empathy and vulnerability, and you're curious enough that you find out where they're coming from. And then you get them to, and then you're able to label it, and they say, "That's right." Okay? That's where effective leadership comes from. And the beautiful thing about what you're doing is you're coming in, they're bringing you in, and you're coming in when these sides, like you said, are doing this, and you're able to sit down with each side and say, "Look, let's talk about this. Let's figure out where you're coming from, and then let's get back together and see if we can find common ground." That's brilliant, David. Absolutely brilliant what you're doing for these companies. And
Thank
it's
you,
a big
Mike.
deal. It's needed.
Well, it means that while once we put out the fire, and that creates so many epiphanies for organizations, that we then go back in and work on their strategies again,
Yeah.
and they realize that through these aha moments that they've experienced, that strategy, their leadership style, the whole strategic management of the organizations changes as a result. But as I was listening to you then talk about Chris Voss's experience,
Mhm.
I can't imagine those sorts of experiences that he went through in the Philippines. Although I do get brought in when there's a fear of a punch up
Mhm.
in a community style meeting.
Mhm.
And I just wanted to add to what you said, that having completely agreed with what I listened to, that I trained some years ago under a gentleman named Johann Galtung, who he's just passed away at 93 years of age. I trained under him when he was about 86 years of age. He was seen as one of the founding fathers of conflict resolution.
Mhm.
Um, Story about his life for another day, unfortunately. But what I learned about him, that if anyone out there watching this is thinking about, it's all very well, David and Mike, to be talking about, listening to people, and particularly if they're angry, and bringing them down from a place of anger or concern or frustration to calling on, I was going to say their better side, calling on their focus side to help you.
Mhm.
It's all very well to say that, but I don't like dealing with cranky people, or alternatively, cranky people, angry people, I should say, are unreasonable.
Mhm.
And geez, I wish they'd just shut up. One of the big lessons that I learned from Johann Galtung is this: for the polarized world that we live in today. And I'd said to you off camera before how, you could give two people nowadays the same piece of paper with the same information on it,
Mhm.
and they'll take two very different meanings from that. And that leads to anger and, and othering of people, and seeing people as unreasonable. The key lesson that I wanted to share in that situation that I learned from Mr. Galtung is this: it's critical that even when you're having to be exposed to anger and screaming at you, is always looking out for what's the legitimate goal or objective behind what the person's saying. So as you're working to dig deeper, yes, there are times when you might be listening to illegitimate goals, whether that be racism or sexism. There's ways you've got to deal with that. But often when we're looking at the unreasonable people, they actually have a legitimate goal that we need to be, that once we find, we realize that these people aren't as unreasonable as we thought. So I just want to share that in the conversation as well.
Yeah, I totally agree with that. And I'll add to it, what I've found in conflict resolution that I've been involved in is, a lot of times when people are angry about something, what's really the source of the anger is something else deeper. It's something that's going on in their life that has absolutely nothing to do with what they're angry about. Okay.
Yes.
But they're
Yep.
disappointed in their life, or they're stressed out, or they're right. And this just happens to be one of those flashpoint issues that now they're losing it over. Right. And really, it's not that issue, it's something else. And what I find is when people are that unreasonable and that upset and that angry, there's something else going on. And it's not, what happens is somebody comes at us, and they're aggressive, and they're ugly, and they're doing all these things, right? And what they're looking for is they're looking for a fight. And I'm the most boring person in the world to yell at. Do you know why? Because I just sit there and listen. I don't say anything. I just let them, right? Eventually they run out of their own steam, right? And then they have to say something really intelligent like, so what do you have to say for yourself? And my answer always is, I'm really sorry you feel that way. How can I fix this? Okay. And it's never disrespectful. It's always very dispassionate. It's always just, this is the way it is. This is, let's get to the heart or the meat of whatever it is that you're upset about, and let's figure out a way to fix it. I'd rather move on with this, right? And help you, get to a place to where you're feeling better, right? And what happens is, if you don't return their energy, they just run out of steam. And all of a
Yes.
sudden, and
Yep.
then they look at you and they go, wow, you really do care.
Yes.
Because
Yes.
if I
And it's
didn't
very
care
powerful.
about them more than I care about myself, I'd be yelling at them, right? I'd be returning the energy. And it's not about me, man. It's about whatever it is that is their challenge. And then how do we solve it? I can't help them with their personal life. Okay. I can't help them with their finances. I can't help them with all the stuff that's making them so incredibly angry. But what I can do is I can care enough to ask. I can care enough to listen. I can care enough to take myself out of it. Right? And I don't know if you're seeing this, but this is like a running theme with me. I take myself out of the thing, right? I pour into them. Like, what I do is I pour into my guests. I pour into the audience that I'm talking to. I pour into the people that I'm working with, because I need them to know that I love them more than I love myself, and I care more about their success than I do about my own, right? And once we get to that place, then we're where we can be to grow as in a relationship. But until we get there, and until they know through my actions and through how I conduct myself, what my values are and what I'm passionate about, we're not getting anywhere until that happens, right? And that's what I think is so brilliant about what you're doing. Go ahead.
Thank you, Mike. That was so lovely to listen to, and you helped me remember one other thing, which adds to what you've just said. All these well-meaning leaders that we've talked about today, and I've referred to, being wired almost in their DNA with that story of, I've got to be the great leader.
Mm-hmm.
Often the way they see the world, or they see their organization's context, is that it's very natural to think you're at the center of things.
Mm-hmm.
But in the world we live in today, whether you like it or not, you're, forgive me for using this word again, you're exposed to ripples from other situations in life, from all the ways that complexity hits us in life. So your organization might think that all you need to focus on is your customers, the market, maybe your staff, your regulator, and so on. Unfortunately, we need to take a more holistic view and realize, to be appreciative. I really like what you'd said before too, Mike, that appreciate that for a leader, sometimes you create the conflict yourself, or you create the problems in your culture yourself.
Mm-hmm. And it's an insecurity thing. It's an insecurity thing, because they don't want to have dialogue. They don't want to have, they don't want feedback. They want to walk in a room, they want to shout an order, and they want to walk back out. And they don't want anybody to question them, right? What they should be doing is questioning themselves and the people that are working, that are reporting to them. That's what should be happening. And the conversation should be, instead of walking in and saying, you need to get our sales up 50% and you have, a year to do it, they should walk in and say, we're here and we want to be here. How do we get there, and how can you be involved? What ideas do you have, okay, to make this happen? How can you help us get there? Right? And if we get there, how, where are we now, and how do we, right? And if you were going to give us your feedback, on a scale of 1 to 10, 1 being completely unacceptable, 10 being perfect, where do you think we are? Well, we're a 6. Great. How do we become a 7? Help me figure out, how do we become a 7? How do we become a 10? How do we become a 10 plus? Now, after you're done as a leader having that conversation with that person that's working with you, do they now feel like they're part of the solution?
They feel involved.
Do they? Yeah. Do they feel fulfilled? Do they own the plan? Right? I'm working with a young man right now that's mad at the world. Okay. Mad at the world. And he's completely doing all kinds of antisocial things. And these people brought me in because they were convinced that I was the only person that they knew that could connect with this kid. And I've connected with him. Okay. And what's interesting about all that is I told him that he needed to put a plan together to get from here to where he wants to be. Because where he is right now, he doesn't want to be there. To get from here to here, he needs an action plan. And he said, well, why do I have to do it? It's a true story. He's a teenager, okay? And he said, why do I have to do it? And I said, well, let me ask you a question. I didn't tell him. I asked him, let me ask you a question. If I come up with the plan and I present it to you, who owns the plan? What do you think he answered? You do. Great. Who needs to own the plan? Right? And so I asked him, I said, if you come up with the plan and you present it to me, who owns the plan? He said, I do. And I said, who needs to own the plan? He said, I do. Question answered, right? Asked and answered. Okay.
Yep.
The difference is I didn't walk in and go, look, your deal is broken. In order to get from here to here, you have to do that, right? I didn't do that because it's not my life, right? I'm not the one that's trying to get from here to here. He is. I'm just the guy that's connecting with him to try to help him get there. Does that make sense? So if you work with your employees that way as a leader, what I find, or what I found, is you walk away and they have a sense of ownership. They feel fulfilled in their job. And what's interesting about that is when these people feel fulfilled in their job, they'll work harder, they'll take less money, they won't be looking at competitors, they won't be looking for a raise, they won't be, you with me? They tend to work for less money, they tend to be more profitable, and they tend to be happier. Sounds like to me that's the winning solution, right?
Absolutely. Absolutely. Mike, I'm probably going to be controversial here, but I think that
we'll have a giggle and be over it.
We talk about thinking, but I don't think that there's a lot of critical or strategic thinking going on in organizations.
There's not. There's just reaction. Right?
That's right.
Yeah.
That's right.
Yeah.
So to add to what you've just said, I think to help us be better informed about, and sorry, I'll go back a step. As a result of a lack of critical thinking, we're not as informed as we should be as a leader.
I agree.
We're not making the right decisions. We're not making the best decisions for our shareholders or our stakeholders. We're not creating value as well as we could. As you've quite eloquently described just then, by involving your staff isn't just a nice to have, or involving, stakeholders who you've never even thought about, who live 10 miles away, or government agencies or not-for-profits who are still affected by your work and have similar interests. It's not just a nice to have. If you actually actively involve them and listen deeply, you become better informed. It helps you think better about a situation, and as you said, shift you from reaction to being more proactive
Mm-hmm.
in the situation. It's better for you and your leadership, your growth, and for your organization.
Yeah, it changes everything because all of a sudden you start thinking differently, right? And if you open up those lines of communication, people will feel empowered to come back to you and say, "Hey, you know what? If we did this, let's try this." Right? Start looking at some of the most incredible things that have happened over the years. Think about some of the most incredible things that have been invented. Think about, right? And oftentimes, if you keep going and you actually source them, it comes from the place you never imagined.
Yes. Yep.
But it was just
Yep.
somebody's idea because they were working one day and they looked at this and said, "You know what? This would be a good solution." Unbelievable. Unbelievable. If we could just get leaders to do what we're talking about, you'd be out of a job.
That's right. That's right.
So see, I told you we'd have a giggle. So if somebody is looking to bring you in, and I hope they are, because what you're doing is absolutely genius. If somebody's looking to bring you in to basically help them put their company back together, how can they reach you?
Yeah. And I even if you want to just, ladies and gentlemen, reach out for a conversation about your situation, and it goes no. I love to, like you, Mike. I love to listen to people's stories.
Yeah.
So they can find me at LinkedIn. Is an easy place. David Ross. I call myself a Fragile World Strategist.
Yeah.
That's a story for another time.
Yeah.
You can easily find me that way. My organization's called Phoenix Strategic Management. I'd be only too happy to, as Mike, you do so fantastically, imagine my ear growing and growing as I listen to your stories.
David Ross, this has been an absolute pleasure. I have loved
pleasure.
every second of this. I'm so glad we had an opportunity to meet. And thank you for being our guest on the Mike Litton Experience.
Mike, make no mistake, it's been my pleasure. Thank you so much for your time and for your viewers' time, and thank you so much for listening.
Thanks, buddy. Can I ask you a question? Did you know that there's a technology that uses sound waves that'll tell your brain what to do? There literally is. It's called newcalm.com. It can tell your brain to heal, tell your brain to sleep, tell your brain to do all kinds of things. It can get you fired up. It can be a pre-workout. Newcalm.com. And the promo code is Mike15. Newcalm.com, promo code Mike15 for an extra 15% off. Go today.
And that's a wrap. Another episode of the Mike Litton Experience in the books. Reach out to Mike on Instagram at the Mike Litton Experience.